The chair recognizes Representative Gay-Dagnogo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked that I be able to speak to the entire package
Yes,
of bills.
please do.
You know, as a former Detroit public school teacher and a first-term legislator, I am amazed by what I've learned in this last year. There's nothing more pressing to me, more important to me, than making sure that all children receive a quality education, not just Detroit children. I am DPS, a product of DPS. My son graduated from DPS K through 12. But I'm amazed by the widening perspectives that we have in this legislature that continue to pit us against each other. I continue to look for answers and solutions, and I spent a great amount of time researching the history of our educational systems in the city of Detroit. 20 years after Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, the Supreme Court case of 1974 would seek to remedy the hatred and enmity that exists within our state for people of color through desegregation and busing. The housing restrictions during the Great Migration ensured Detroit's large African-American population, which made it easy for economic and education discrimination along city lines. And that's still evident today. Redlining and savage inequalities in our schools. The package of bills before us today builds on that foundation of institutional racism. In 1970, the NAACP filed suit against state Michigan officials, citing unfair housing policies. Although our schools weren't white only, surrounding communities and counties enacted policies to increase racial segregation in schools. Judge Stephen Roth, see very little things change, ruled in favor of the NAACP's decision, their case. However, the Supreme Court voted 5-4, overturning the lower court's decision, stating that schools didn't have to desegregate unless it had been proven that school district lines were drawn with racial intent. We have to prove racial intent. Oddly enough, though, the court emphasized at that time the importance of local control. Justice Thurgood Marshall offered a dissenting opinion, stating that school lines, however innocently drawn, would be perceived as fences to separate and divide races when we look at Detroit only legislation. Very little changes. I began my teaching career in a very fragmented educational landscape in the city of Detroit. At DEPSA Public School Academy, yes, a charter school. A charter school situated in Detroit's Eastern Market area, not very many homes nearby, but a new building that attracted parents that had access to transportation, seeking to enroll their children for a good education. While I had no benchmark for what the classroom should reflect, I saw varying levels of academic performance in my 6th through 8th grade science classes. Through informal analysis, I found that children with engaged parents performed reasonably well. However, the common challenge for many of the teachers in that school was spending enormous time teaching to the tests, trying to ensure that children could do well on tests. We had the typical adolescent problems, behavioral challenges, but there wasn't a whole lot of difference that I found once I transitioned into Detroit public schools. It was a different experience. These schools were neighborhood schools that enrolled students on a rolling basis. They even accepted those students that returned from the charter schools after count day without the money. It was a problem for Detroit Public Schools because the lion's share of special needs students, which cost so much more, existed in our traditional public schools. Our teachers served as counselors, social workers, after-school tutors, mentors, ensuring that children had an opportunity to learn. We sacrificed hours to go to games, to go to dance recitals, to go to places that sometimes even their parents couldn't go to because they worked 2 part-time jobs or jobs that didn't add up enough to take care of their families. Yes, we as teachers did more with less. Now, we face a period where we're talking about 14 years of state control. And it was my period of time of working under Robert Bobb, the second wave of our state takeover. Teachers were told to make concessions, and we did. We lent the district the $10,000. Yes, I lent DPS money, while Barbara Byrd and Robert Bobb lived lavishly off of taxpayers' expense. Teachers made these kind of sacrifices because we believed in our students. Many of us are products of Detroit Public Schools. Our families attended Detroit Public Schools. With strained finances due to state takeover and the proliferation of uncapped charters, it created a domino effect, an economic hardship that teachers were willing to fill that gap. And we felt it by making concession after concession with increased health care costs, no prep periods, unsafe working conditions, yet contractors fed off of our children, creating this abysmal debt, unchecked, with no oversight, with 5 emergency managers. DPS, oh yes, she's sick, she's been robbed, she's been raped by state control. 5 emergency managers created this deficit, not teachers that sacrificed their lives, their health, living from paycheck to paycheck because it's been cut so low, not teachers that are going to get payday loans because they can't pay their mortgages and their car notes, not teachers, emergency managers, state control, and these contracts that we don't even know what the money was spent on. What are we hiding? Why are we refusing an audit of the system that we put in place with emergency managers? Why is it we don't want to look at their expenses, the big cars that they drove around in, the hotels that they stayed in, the credit cards that they spent up? Why is it that we don't want to look at what they've done, but we want to attack teachers? I question our consciousness, our true commitment to being statesmen and stateswomen. On what academic basis do we consider that this is what's best for our children? I know what's best for our children. I taught them. I still communicate with them today. I gave my tickets today to a student at King to go see President Obama. That's my commitment to our kids, because we would be here on the floor dealing with this issue of their future. What basis are we making this decision when the adequacy study that we paid for was due on March 31st and it is May 5th and it's still not here? What basis, what research, what pedagogical knowledge do you have to make such bills to attack and destroy our school system? I plead with your consciousness. I plead with justice. I plead with the words of the prayer that the sister prayed earlier, that we would seek a higher consciousness than Dick DeVos. I plead that we would seek a higher consciousness than finance to our campaigns. I plead that we would look in the brown faces of the 47,000 children that are remaining in the Detroit public schools and vote in opposition to this package. Oh, yes, you might have the numbers to pass it. But as you've done unto me, the word of God says, you've done unto my children, you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me. You might not answer to me, but you're going to answer to God. Vote no.